Mysteries and Mysteries. I am one of your hosts, Ashley Fleming, and
I am Jessica Thompson. And on today's episode, Ashley will have a two-part story on a fascinating topic, witches. And I will be talking about the Lizzie Borden murder and trial. Shall we begin?
yeah, I'm very excited about this one. I went real far back in time. So this one's going to be a two-parter for me because I start with kind of back in European time and kind of how witches came to be that fear. And then next week I'll bring it to the colonies and talk about Salem and the Salem witch trials.
Yay! I'm so excited.
Yeah, I found out some really cool information. I do want to preface this with, if anybody is, I guess kind of trigger warning, there is a couple instances of torture in here, because they obviously tortured women to get them to confess to be witches, and I do talk about it a little bit. I don't go into too gory of detail, but I just want to throw that out there. So, all right, so let's get going. My sources, I used quite a bit. I used Wikipedia, of course. The History Channel, this place called History Extra, which is like an offshoot of the BBC. A site called Quartz, and then a site called Malleus Malleus Maleficarum.com. And that is actually the title of a really famous book that we'll talk about that I'm probably going to stumble over the name every time. So just be ready for that.
Perfect.
Britannica.com, going back old school with the encyclopedias. Biography.com. And then I found this random paper by a girl named Laura R. Kremmel that she did for school. And it was like online. She did it for one of her master's programs, I think. So I got some information from that too. So we'll get going. So Agnes Sampson was born in the early to mid 1500s in Netherkeith, Scotland, and grew up to be an accomplished healer and midwife. Unfortunately for her, in the spring of 1950, King James VI, who was King of Scotland at the time, married Anne of Denmark. But why would a wedding be unfortunate for a random girl named Agnes? Well, the king's travels back from Denmark were wrought with storms, and because of this, it was a really hard trip for them. And one man on board accused Christopher Valkendorf, and I believe that's how you pronounce it, but could be wrong.
These names are wild.
Yes. Of not properly stocking the ship. So he said, hey, you didn't properly stock the ship. It made the travel harder. This is your fault. But little Christopher, yeah, was like, no, it's not my fault. It has to be a group of witches who had demons climb up on the side of the ship to conjure the storm and wreak havoc.
What in the world?
And come to think of it, I insulted this lady, Karen the Weaver, a few weeks ago, and it was probably her.
Oh no, poor Karen.
Poor Karen the Weaver. So, Karen, apparently they liked this idea, and Karen was promptly arrested, tortured, and confessed, naming several other women in the crime. So, this kind of created a waterfall effect, because she was arrested, named several other women, they were arrested and tortured and named other women, and so on and so forth. And this was actually called the North Berwick Trials, and they ran for 2 years and implicated over 70 people.
What?
And these ones implicated both men and women. Mostly women, obviously, but there were a few men in there. And meanwhile, at the same time, a young servant girl named Jillian had begun to show miraculous healing abilities and snuck out at night. And again, the only reasonable explanation was that she was a witch, right?
Duh.
Under torture, she finally confessed and named several other women who were witches, as well as our Agnes Sampson.
Oh.
So, I'm not really sure, and they were all charged with creating the storm on King James VI, and I'm not really sure how Jillian was connected to Karen the Weaver, but I'm sure somewhere in the waterfall effect she was named, and that's kind of how Agnes was named as well. And Agnes was arrested and denied all accusations. She was then tortured with a witch's bridle, which is like a horse bridle. It goes on their face, and there's 4 sharp prongs on it. 2 go like on the tongue, and the other 2 are on the cheeks. Yeah, and she wasn't allowed to sleep, and it just said she was thrown with a rope around her neck. So I don't know if that means like they literally put a rope around her neck and just threw her around. I would assume that's what it meant. But after all of that, she finally confessed to the 53 counts against her. She was strangled and burned at the stake in 1551.
This poor girl.
I know. So, and the thing about her too is when she was arrested, she was kind of a well-known woman in the community. She was elderly. So obviously after all of this, torture, she wasn't doing well. She's old. And she finally had to confess. And this is just one of the many stories we've all heard about this time period and women getting accused of witchcraft. So I really wanted to look into why witches and how did this fear become so out of hand. So I looked all the way back and I went back to the early 1300s. And most people tried back then for witchcraft, which it wasn't a lot, were men because they were tried for necromancy. For those of you that don't know, necromancy is where you kind of conjure up dead people to help do your bidding. These texts for necromancy were only written in Latin, so only those with an education could read it. And at the time, as we know, women weren't well educated, so it was mostly men that were doing this magic. But again, for the most part, it was okay. They kind of, back in that time, magic and them kind of coexisted. A lot of people believed in trolls and elves. They had necromancy and sorcerers, but it wasn't kind of the witchcraft that we know today of that time, of the early European time. And they all just kind of lived together in harmony. There wasn't really, too much going on. When people got out of control, that's when they would be tried. A little fun fact too, I put this in here. I don't really know where it goes, but just a fun fact. Did you know that 54% of Icelandic people still believe in elves?
Really?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of cute. I like
That
that.
is cute.
Yeah.
Don't they have like the little like I don't know, I could be totally wrong, but I saw something somewhere where they had like the little homes in the ground and stuff and
Yeah, I think that's for real. I mean, I went to Iceland, gosh, maybe a year or 2 ago. The most beautiful place I've ever been in my entire life.
yeah.
I want to live there. I loved it so much. I didn't see any elf houses, but I didn't like go up, in the little towns. We mostly stayed in Reykjavik and then the surrounding areas. But yeah, I have heard of those little elf houses they have.
Cute.
Yeah. So again, most of these people that were tried were men. And it wasn't until 1487 that women were really paired with witchcraft. And we have one man to thank for that. His name was Heinrich Kramer. He was German. And he wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches. And I couldn't have put this better myself, so I'm just going to read this quote from that History Extra site I went to, that BBC offshoot. They said, Kramer warned that women's sexual... Oh, sorry. Let me start that over. It said, Kramer warned that women's spiritual weakness and natural proclivity for evil made them particularly susceptible to the temptations of the devil. He believed that all witchcraft comes from carnal lust and that women's uncontrolled sexuality made them likely culprits of any sinister occurrence.
Sorry, it's really funny.
So we're too sexy, Jessica.
Oh no.
Yeah. So apparently we're too sexy and too sexual and too easily persuaded by the devil. So this is what really started to cause that shift from men being kind of the necromancer sorcerers to women being the witches that were doing these evil things. And during this time, there was also kind of a shift in the belief in actual magic. So before, like I said, they were kind of just coexisting. But now it was believed to be more diabolical. So the 15th century believed that you had to have a pact with the devil to be a witch, because people could still be possessed by the devil and doing his bidding because they had no control. But if you had a pact with the devil, that was how you were a witch. And they believed that these witches engaged in orgies, secret meetings, and baby eating.
Sorry.
Ate those babies.
Oh, no.
So
Okay.
it was an important distinction that they made a pact with the devil, because at the time they still did have the necromancers and sorcerers, which were seen as diabolical, but I guess an okay form of it, because they could study and hone their craft, I guess, whereas they were saying witches make a pact with the devil, and that's why it's bad, but the other ones are okay. So, very fine line there.
Of course.
Yeah. And they believe that this pact that they made was called the Witches' Sabbath, and they believed that this is just so ridiculous. They believed that witches would cover themselves in a special oil that allowed them to fly through the air, or they would ride a goat or a dog given to them by the devil to these gatherings.
I like the goat.
I'm gonna ride my chocolate lab to the gatherings.
Imagine it was one of those screaming goats.
Just flying through the air screaming.
Oh my goodness. I bought like a little statuette off of Amazon once, and he's just a screaming goat. So you just push the base and he screams.
That's what they rode.
It's my favorite purchase ever.
So they believed that they would use these things to fly to their gatherings, which was usually on a pagan holiday, such as Halloween was a big one, stuff like that. And they said that at these gatherings, they would, quote, kiss the devil under his tail. So, like, his butthole? I don't...
I was gonna say his
what?
butt.
Yeah, I don't... Okay. And then they also had indiscriminate sex.
Ooh.
Naughty sex.
Satanic sex.
It's the best kind. So, shockingly, Germany executed the highest number of women as witches, and Ireland had the lowest. So, go Ireland.
Yeah.
Why witches? There's two theories on why this kind of mass hysteria of witches came. So, because of this book that religious leader wrote, it kind of started to bring that train going of being afraid of witches. But why did it take off the way it did? And one of the theories is weather. So apparently during that time period, they were kind of having a mini ice age. So obviously their crops weren't doing well. There was a lot of famine. It was cold. There was ice storms. There was hail. And each time there was an increase in something bad like this, there would be an increase in accusations, because they needed someone to blame for their misfortune. They needed something to pin this on that they could fix to have some control over this horrible situation they were living in. The other theory, which I think these probably work in tandem. But the other theory has to do with the Catholic Protestant War. And I find that period of time extremely interesting, and I'll probably do an episode on that at some point, the Catholic Protestant Wars. During this time, obviously, the Catholic Church was basically the only religion until Martin Luther came along and created the Protestant Church. And basically, the two churches were kind of trying to recruit people, be Catholic, be Protestant. And Luther himself was a believer in witchcraft, and he himself executed 4 women. He was keeping the people safe from these evil witches, and the Catholic Church wanted to capitalize on that and thought, hey, we have to prove that we can keep people safe from witches so that they will want to stay Catholic. So they kind of started to execute their own witches, which led to St. Maximin's, which was a mass execution in Germany, believed to be as many as 1,000 um, accused witches. So it was one of the bloodiest massacres of like a witch execution.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I've never even heard of that.
I hadn't either. And so then, the Protestant church was like, well, we can kill witches too, and so on and so forth, until it was this raging war. Several religious books were written during this time about witchcraft and kind of how to fight it off and, what to look for. And the most famous of them being that Malleus Maleficarum that I talked about earlier, the Hammer of Witches. And it was written again in 1487 by that German Catholic inquisitor. And for 2 centuries, it was the second most purchased book next to the Bible. It was written to teach magistrates how to identify, interrogate, and convict women of witchcraft. So it's kind of like as the one site I read put it, witchcraft for dummies, like how to get witches and stop them. And within his book, he wrote that there are 3 things necessary for witchcraft: evil intentions of the witch, help from the devil, and permission of God. And that last one, the permission of God, I don't really get. That one doesn't really make sense to me, but I couldn't find a lot that really delved into that, but maybe just that, you have to have permission of God. My dog is crying outside the door. I don't know if you can hear it.
No. Like, why are we laughing about God right now?
No, it's my dog. She's been really clingy since our other dog died last week.
Yeah.
So she's like, I hear outside the door like, "Rrr."
Oh, I know. I shut myself in my closet where I record, and my husband let our dog in about 2 minutes later, and all I hear is him booking it up the stairs, and like he rammed into the door. And it's a small closet. It's like a small walk-in closet. And I'm shoved against the back wall behind the door with all my pillows. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll try and open the door. And he just like squeezed himself in.
Is he in there with you right now?
No, I made him leave.
Oh.
He started getting really wild and started
Oh.
barking and like doing his pouncing thing, wanting to play. So I'm like, no, you need to leave.
Oh,
He
puppies.
he would not sit still for however long we have to record this, so I just needed to let him out.
All right, well, I just couldn't tell if you could hear her crying, so I wanted to make sure.
My mom, okay, sorry, off topic.
Yeah.
My mom just messaged me because she's listening to our first episode, and she's like, "Good job not swearing. Makes your mama proud."
I feel attacked.
She's like, "How old is Ashley?"
I feel attacked, Jessica.
So funny. It's the only thing she says about the podcast. Good job not swearing. Not, I loved it. You did so well.
My mom listened to it too, and she was like, "You have a potty mouth." I was like, "I only swore like 3 times."
Yeah, Kyle said you only swore once, so.
I swore. I said, "Oh, are you ready for this, listeners?" I said 2 fucks and a shit.
Oh my goodness. I'm typically a potty mouth, so I usually have to like watch myself.
Anyway, so permission of God. And so I think the permission of God is just that, not necessarily like God's like, yeah, hey, hang out with the devil, but that he's not actively inserting himself in between this pack is what I took it as. But it does say that it's mostly witches that do the recruiting, and they do this one of 2 ways: either by making something bad happen to a woman so that she seeks out a witch for help, or that they tempt a young woman with young devils.
Hot men.
Hot men. And the book also goes on to say to elicit confessions, torture and deception should be used. One suggestion, okay. This one's pretty bad. So, trigger warning on this one. If you don't like it, just skip ahead like 10 seconds. One suggestion is called the strappado, which is where they would tie their hands behind their backs and then hang them from their wrists. So, yeah, so it's like backwards and it would pop their shoulders out. And they said they could only do that for about an hour before it would cause death. And I'm not really sure how it caused death. I don't know if it would just like rip. I don't know. And then they said afterwards you should take them aside after the torture and tell them that they wouldn't be put to death if they confessed, even though they 100% would be put to death.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things I thought was interesting, too, is they said that if they confess during torture, you have to bring them out and have them confess again, because you can't always trust a confession under torture, which, okay, that makes sense. You can't trust a confession under torture. They'll say whatever you want. But then if they refuse to confess again, then they can torture them again, but in a different way. They can't torture them in the same way that they previously had done, which, okay.
Which sucks because then they're just being tortured double.
Yeah.
In other heinous ways.
Yeah. I mean, rules, but... So let's talk witch hunters a little bit.
Okay.
They were usually religious men who would travel around accusing and torturing women using the hammer of witches. That was like their guidebook on what to do. And I didn't realize this, but they were generally paid for their results. So however many women they could get to confess was how much they would get paid. So they would get paid like 20 pence per witch that they got to confess. I feel like that would skew things a bit.
I keep forgetting people can't see my face. Because I keep making these, like, horrible faces.
Like, excuse me? What?
Yeah, like, in reaction to your story. And I forgot that I need to be vocal about myself. That's heinous. I hate that.
Yeah, it was awful. And they were also given some common tests. And one common test, which I'm sure we've heard of, was to strip a woman naked and look for marks. So the witch's mark or the devil's mark. And they had two kinds of marks, visible marks and invisible marks.
Oh, what a catch.
So the visible marks could be anything like a freckle, a mole, a skin tag, anything like that. And an invisible mark was one that if it was poked, it did not cause pain or blood to appear. They said that a lot of these witch hunters would carry around like spring-loaded knives and like pins so that they could just like stab them. And yeah, I don't know. And the thought was that if they were guilty of witchcraft, the guilt in them would be such that they would no longer feel pain on their body as a normal person would.
Huh?
Yeah. So if they poked you and you didn't cry out or bleed, you're a witch.
Well, if I knew those rules, I would just scream bloody murder.
Right? Now, are you ready for this next part?
No, but go ahead.
These marks were believed to be where an imp sucked on the witch to exchange power.
Ew.
And they believed that this had to be done every 24 hours. And if it wasn't, that spot would like fill up and burst. So kind of like women that breastfeed, when they don't pump or feed, their breast fills up and it gets really painful. They thought the same thing would happen wherever that mark was on their body if the imp didn't suck from the witch.
That sounds so wrong.
Yes. So what they would do is they would tie these women up naked in a chair and leave them alone in a room in hopes that an imp would appear. And they would leave them for up to 3 days with no food, no water, and any animal that came near the woman was considered an imp. And sometimes they would place animals in the area so that they would walk up to the woman and they could be like, oh, there's an imp. She's a witch.
But, like, an animal would definitely walk up to anybody that they saw if they were just standing sitting
Yeah,
still.
especially, like, it depends, like, if you put a dog in there, 100% of dogs coming up to you.
Yeah, pet me, man,
Yeah.
pet me.
Nope. Now you're a witch. They would also use water testing, where they would tie a woman up, throw her in the water. If she floated, she was a witch. If she sank, she was innocent.
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
Yeah, so damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
And so the witch trials lasted in Europe until about 1750, murdering around 200,000 innocent people. During the height of all this, the first colony in America was founded in 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia. So that was smack dab in the middle of this witch hysteria, and the colonists were taking this fear and this knowledge, I say with air quotes, of witches to a new, harsh, and unforgiving land where they would undoubtedly run into many obstacles that they would have a rough time and need someone to blame.
Yeah.
Hence, where we get into our Salem witch trials, which I will say for next week.
Yay! Sorry, that was. I love the Salem witch trials.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited.
Yay, good story.
Thanks.
It's very fascinating.
Get a little history in there.
I love it. I love history.
Me too.
Good thing we're doing a podcast called Histories and Mysteries.
Good thing.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to take a little sip of my Gatorade. All right. I'm repositioning my body. Hopefully you don't hear papers rustling too much because I went old school.
I'm very excited for this old school story on old school paper.
Yay! All right, so I am doing Lizzie Borden, and I used a couple of sources. I used a website called allthat'sinteresting.com, and the article was written by Elizabeth Sherman. And then I also watched a Buzzfeed Unsolved video, which was really fun. So,
Ooh, are those good? I've been wanting to watch them, but I haven't yet.
it's quite honestly the only one I've seen.
Oh, okay.
It was cool because they did like a little ghost hunt of their own, and then they also gave like a timeline of what happened, which was really cool. And it's where I learned one of the points that I didn't know before, so it was
Okay.
very interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, the day was August 4th, 1892. Lizzie slept in that day. They had a servant or maid lady. Her name was Bridget, and she served breakfast to Mr. Borden. His name is Andrew, Lizzie's dad, and Mrs. Borden, whose name was Abby, and it was Lizzie's stepmom. Emma, Lizzie's older sister, was away with friends, so it was just Mr. and Mrs. Borden in the house, Bridget, and Lizzie. So, back in these times, Lizzie was an unmarried 32-year-old Sunday school teacher,
Ooh.
which I did not know that she was a Sunday school teacher.
I didn't know that either, but 30 and unmarried? Whoa, baby.
Yeah.
I bet she's a witch.
Exactly, that old spinster. So, I didn't know what my next point meant, and I understand it, so we're good. It just says she joined the family last, but she joined the family last at breakfast.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm like, no. Anyway, so she came down last. She usually didn't eat breakfast with them, and so today was no different. She said, "No, I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat." Her uncle, John Morse, was visiting the family. He arrived unannounced the day prior, which is pretty friggin' rude. And then he left the house. He didn't have breakfast either. He just left. He's like, "Peace out, homies."
So he just, like, came for the night, like, literally to sleep in a bed and then left?
Well, he didn't like leave. He just left for the day.
Oh,
like,
okay. Gotcha.
Go see people, but he's like, "Peace out. I'm peacing."
I don't want to see you guys. I just need your bed.
Exactly. Yeah, because I think he was Mr. Borden's first wife's brother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just there visiting. Andrew, the father, left the house, and he left the house to go see some people, do some things around town, whatever. He was very wealthy and he was a very successful businessman, so he had things that he needed to get done in the morning.
Gotcha.
And everybody else stayed home. Lizzie said that she did some chores out in the barn and all this other stuff, and Bridget was just being Bridget, doing her things, cleaning some windows around the house. And Mrs. Borden was just doing some tidying as well. She was cleaning up John Morse's bedroom, which was the guest bedroom at the time. But then a little while later, Andrew returned home, and Lizzie came downstairs to state that Mrs. Borden had left the house after receiving a note that she stated her friend was sick. Now, Lizzie called her Mrs. Borden because she did not like her stepmother at all. So she refused to call her Abby, and she refused to call her anything else but Mrs. Borden because they had a feud a little while
I
ago.
like how the polite gesture is like a slide, like, "Oh, I'll get you, Mrs. Borden."
Exactly. It's like, I'm not going to call her by her first name. I'm just going to call her Mrs. Borden. So, um, so yeah, she said that she left to go see a friend because she received a letter that her friend was sick. And this is a huge point to remember for later.
Okay.
Andrew's like, okay. And so he went for a nap on the sofa, and Bridget went for a rest in her room because she wasn't feeling well. So the last couple of days, the family had been really sick. Like, they kind of had the flu, they were throwing up, and it kind of went through everybody, except Lizzie didn't really get it. But they kind of thought that maybe Bridget was feeling the effects of this, and that's why she wasn't feeling well and went down for a nap.
Gotcha. That makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, so apparently Bridget only woke up when she heard Lizzie screaming.
Mm.
Fun way to wake up.
Yeah, that would be horrible.
Yeah, so they ran downstairs because Lizzie was saying, he's dead, he's dead. And so went downstairs, and in the family room, I guess, where he was sleeping on the sofa, they found Lizzie's dad dead. His face was brutally mutilated, and he was
Mm.
unrecognizable due to his injuries.
Ugh. That's the one thing that, like, kind of always got me about this case is that, if someone's going to basically mutilate your face, I feel like that's personal.
Yeah. Seems very personal to me, and it seemed kind of personal to other people too, but you know. um our stories are actually a little different in the way that women are perceived in our different time periods, so
Yes, very much so.
we'll get into that a little later.
Okay.
So Bridget ran to fetch a doctor, and all the commotion attracted the attention of the neighbors in the area as well. So at this point, Abby's whereabouts were still unknown, and Lizzie kept up the ruse, telling concerned neighbors a story about the sick friend. She never let up about it. It was always she was off to see a sick friend. So once Bridget returned with the doctor, she went to check for Abby, and she located her face down in a pool of her own blood in the guest bedroom.
Ugh.
Yeah. I'm sure people have seen the famous photos, and with the mirror, her beside the bed, face down, and it's just a gruesome scene.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way you can make a murder with an axe not gruesome. That's going to be a bad scene to walk in on.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like you said, right, it just seemed so personal, so it was just even more so, right? So there's some gross knowledge that I'm going to bestow upon all of you because I didn't know about it, and I think it's really cool in the sense that it's just very fascinating, not the fact that somebody's dead. But
I like gross stuff. Bring it on.
perfect. I'm so happy you said that. So Abby had been struck 19 times with a hatchet or some sharp instrument.
Hmm.
Andrew had been hit 11 times with the same weapon. Due to this mutilation, I don't know, I'm uncomfortably laughing. One of Andrew's eyes had been cut in half, and
Ooh.
his nose was no longer on his face.
Oh.
Yeah. So, uncomfortable knowledge for you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish they had were more like advanced back then, like they aren't now, and could tell us, you know, when he died, like how much pain he actually like did he have to live through all of that, you know, or was like the first blow it and the rest was just, you know, he wasn't there for
I
it.
think it honestly depends on where the first blow was. So I would
Yeah.
assume if it was in the back of his head, then yes, he would be completely gone. But if it was his face, he could still
Right.
survive it, right? So,
Yeah.
but either way, pretty horrible deaths. I just found it fascinating that Abby was struck like 8 times more than he was. So it seemed a little more
Yeah.
aggressive.
Yeah, for sure.
The doctor concluded that Abby had actually been killed first due to the color and the form of her blood.
Oh, okay. Just coagulated more, maybe.
Yeah, which I found really interesting. And I think her blood was a little darker as well, which meant that it had been sitting there a little bit longer. So,
That makes sense.
yeah. Now, despite typical knowledge or everyone's popular belief, the police didn't immediately suspect Lizzie as the murderer. If it wasn't Lizzie or Bridget, the timeline made no sense because the killer would have had to have hidden in the house for hours, which means that they would have risked being seen by everyone else in the family, and the sick note wasn't found.
The what?
The note that Lizzie said her stepmother received of a sick friend.
Oh, sick note. Okay. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't understand what you said. Okay, I gotcha.
that's okay. So this was this is why it was a huge point when I first mentioned it earlier, because Lizzie was keeping up this ruse that there was a note from a sick friend for Mrs. Borden. But it appeared as though Mrs. Borden never actually left the house.
Gotcha.
And so they couldn't find the note. Lizzie said, well, maybe she burned the note before she left the house.
As one does. I mean,
Yeah,
what?
exactly. So it made no sense. And the fact that she kept up this ruse, and she also said that, she left the house. I saw her leave the house and she received this note. I just don't know which friend it was. And so it was this huge point in the investigation.
It sounds really sketch.
Exactly. So, one of Lizzie's friends, Alice Russell, saw Lizzie burning her dress in a stove. Lizzie said it was stained and could no longer be worn.
What is it with this girl and burning things?
Right? Isn't it bizarre?
Yeah.
So it just seems very suspicious. She's like, yeah, it was stained. Like, oh, stained with what? Blood?
Yeah, and who I mean, I guess I don't know back in the time back in that time period, but I feel like you would just throw the dress out, not burn it.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe she was thinking, oh, they might think that it's because of this when it's actually not. So she just wanted to get rid of the evidence, I guess.
Yeah, maybe.
But, oh well.
If you believe she's innocent.
Exactly. I don't, honestly.
Neither.
When Russell revealed this to the presiding judge, he charged Lizzie for the murders.
Oh,
So that was some pretty good info that she brought forward. So
pretty circumstantial, but
yeah, and that's the point that we'll get to a bit later. And do you remember how the whole family was sick?
yeah.
So apparently, the day before or a couple days before, Lizzie went to what they had called the pharmacy back then. I don't know what it was. The shop, and she ordered some poison or something. Yeah, the dude wouldn't give it to her. Oh, but that was kind of brought up in court as well as being a point of, oh, she was trying to do it this way, but she failed because they wouldn't give it to her, and so she did it a completely different way.
What was her excuse for trying to buy poison?
I don't know. They
Oh.
didn't really say. Uh, it was just kind of dismissed because it was too circumstantial, and the point that her lawyers made was that it could have been anybody. The shop guy could have mistook her for somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't have like the cameras that we do now to really
Exactly.
pinpoint someone.
Yeah, so they were like, well, it could have been somebody else, and you're just saying it's her because of what's going on right now.
That makes sense.
So that's why it was kind of dismissed. Um, her trial lasted 14 days.
Oh, that was longer than I thought it was.
And see, I always thought it was longer.
Oh, okay.
Just because of how sensationalized it was.
Yeah,
I
that's
figured
true.
that it was going to be much longer than it actually was.
Gotcha.
So this is super weird, but she never actually testified during the trial.
Oh, I thought she had. Interesting.
Yeah. So apparently she never testified, and when the paper covering her father's skull fell off, she fainted. Because what they did was they dug up her parents' skulls and, well, dug up their heads and then burned all the skin and flesh off. Said it was just the skulls so people could see the damage done.
Don't like that.
No. So they had like some paper covering the skulls and stuff, and so it fell off sometime during the trial and she fainted from the sight of it. So they were like, well, somebody that did that definitely, like, somebody who fainted definitely didn't commit these crimes, So it basically just solidified that, she's this lady and the whole thing freaked her out kind of thing, right? Which is just crock,
Yeah.
but whatever. So, kind of as I was like explaining, the interesting fact is that showing these skulls of her parents kind of worked in her favor because her lawyer stated whoever did this would be covered in blood and her clothes had none, which led people to believe she did it naked.
What about the dress that she was burning?
Exactly. So it's like, it was just such a weird thing for them to bring up. Like,
That's a weird jump to make when there's a witness saying that she was burning a dress. Like, no,
yeah,
I think she was just doing it naked.
yeah. But that's the thing, right? So her lawyers were just trying to grasp at anything that they could and basically were like, somebody who did this would be coated in blood. She's obviously not. So just crazy imaginations made people believe that it was some other thing, some wild, naked thing.
Oh my goodness.
So reasonable doubts arose as witnesses came forward. And it was also the fact that she was a woman of Christian background led the jury to believe she couldn't do these things. And there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that could not be proved, such as the poison before, how it was like case of mistaken identity, how like burning the dress, it was just kind of hearsay and that kind of stuff. And because she was a woman of such high stature, she couldn't commit these crimes.
Of course not. Not a woman.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas in your witch's story, these women were viewed as these heinous creatures.
Yeah, that is crazy how
So,
time kind of flip-flopped that.
yeah, and it's just very fascinating between the two different
Yeah,
centuries and stuff, right? So,
yeah. We planned it like that for this podcast.
exactly. We're good at that. um so this happened, her parents were killed August 4th, 1892, and the trial was finished on June 19th or 20th, depending on the source, of 1893. So almost a year later, it was finally concluded. And she was found not guilty, which is good on her behalf,
Yeah.
but I still think she did it.
Yeah, I do too.
So, yeah. So her sister and her inherited their father's fortune and they bought a new house. So the huge point of this is her father was super wealthy, but they lived kind of poorly. So they didn't have running water, they didn't have lighting like everybody else that was rich in the area had. And Lizzie and her sister wanted their father to buy them a house, but he refused, and instead he bought his new wife's sister a house.
Oh.
So it was just like this huge point of contention. And then finally it's like, oh, we have all of his money. We can buy a house that has all these nice things in it. And
What a wonderful motive for murder.
yeah, exactly. So it's just crazy. Despite all of this, there were still, like you and I, a lot of people that believe she did it. So she lived her life pretty ostracized by her community, and eventually she died alone in 1927 at the age of 67.
Wow. One thing I never understood about her is that because she was ostracized by her community, and I feel like it was her that ended up having really lavish parties for like celebrities and stuff. And she liked being around people, but obviously her community didn't support her. Why she didn't leave that community?
I know, it seems very odd, and I don't really know the answer to that. It might just be because she was comfortable there,
Yeah,
and maybe because like her story was so sensationalized, right? It could have spread as well
true.
to the neighboring communities and everything. So I
Hmm.
feel like she might have thought that she couldn't escape it even if she wanted to.
That could be, yeah.
So, um, there's a really, I'm sure you've heard the little children's rhyme.
Yeah.
So Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41, which is so misleading
Yeah.
because she didn't do it that many times, but I guess it works for the
The rhyme.
children's rhyme. But it kind of threw me off when I saw that she had, like, that they were hit significantly less.
Hmm.
So it kind of threw me off, but that's okay. um, so I have another little bit that was the bit of information I didn't know before,
Oh, okay.
and it's from the Buzzfeed Unsolved, which was fascinating. So I always thought Lizzie was the only accused person in this trial.
Okay.
There actually ended up being a couple more, but they got dismissed, obviously.
Hmm.
And another possible suspect that I think came up more recently, I think a professor or a teacher in the Mass area decided to publish a book about it. Um, and the other suspect was potentially John Morse, so Lizzie's
I'll
uncle.
say that was the brother or the uncle, yeah. Okay. I feel like I've heard that theory, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, so the reason he is such a big suspect at this point is because he wasn't seen from 9 a.m. until noon on the day of the murders.
Okay.
And it was said that they were kind of murdered between like 11, like around like 10, 11 in the morning.
Mhm.
So kind of between the time that he was gone.
Mhm.
He claimed he was visiting a sick friend with the doctor. However, that same doctor was actually overseeing Mr. and Mrs. Borden's dead bodies.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
And the motive was that he knew of Andrew's will and he shared a failing livestock business with him. So
Oh.
they entered this business together and it was failing hardcore. So the thought is that he wanted some money from him.
Interesting.
Yeah. And just like Lizzie, all of these were really super circumstantial. So he wasn't even tried.
Wow. Okay. I wonder what made them decide to try Lizzie over him.
I think it was probably to do with the fact that she was so much more involved in the family dynamic, and
Yeah.
there is already a huge feud between her and her stepmother, her and her father, and the biggest part of it was money, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
So,
sense.
yeah, I think that's more so why she was tried a little bit more, but I still think that she did it.
Yeah, I do too. I don't I mean aside from the circumstantial evidence, I mean this is interesting about the uncle. And it would be interesting to know why he lied about that doctor and what he was actually doing, but yeah, I mean I still think Lizzie did it, but
I honestly think that she didn't do it alone. if she did do it.
Oh, maybe he helped her?
Like, it was either the thought that they did it together or her and her sister planned it because her sister was apparently gone with friends. Or there's even the theory that her and Bridget were lovers and they
I've heard
committed
that
it
one.
together because
Yeah, I've heard that one.
in the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode, they were actually sitting in Bridget's room on her bed. And then one of them went down into John Morse's guest bedroom where Mrs. Borden was killed to see if they would hear noise down there if she was laying on her bed, like of
Oh.
a body dropping to the floor or like someone making noise.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy that was up in Bridget's room said, "Yeah, I can hear stuff. It's very faint, but I can hear it." But Bridget said, "I heard nothing."
Oh. Interesting.
So there's all these different theories. Yeah, it's crazy. So I don't know. I think she had some accomplices, but we will never know.
We won't, unfortunately.
We will never know. But that's it. That's Lizzie Borden. I think her story is so
Yeah.
fascinating, and I'm glad I could cover it and hopefully did it justice.
Yeah, I really like that. That was great.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, next week we will be talking about my part 2 on the witches. And Jessica, what are you covering?
I'm covering Cleopatra.
Oh, that's going to be so good. Oh, and you wanted to plug your friend.
Yes. Okay. So we have a wonderful logo that was created by one of my friends. His name is Matt Oliveira. He can be found on social media. His page is Last Matt Standing.
I love
Yeah.
that.
So he's on Instagram, Facebook. He's great. He can do logos for you. He's a graphic designer for the company I work with. So he's really great. Um, so if you ever want to like get anything done, message him because he's pretty wonderful and we're really grateful for him for doing our logo.
Yeah, for sure. He was really easy to work with, and if we wanted any changes made, he had no problem.
Yeah, he's wonderful. So go talk to him, go message him, be like, "We love you. You're awesome." So,
Speaking of social media, Jessica, where can they find us?
we are on Instagram and we are on Facebook. We are Histories and Mysteries. Our Facebook has an ampersand, whereas our Instagram does not because of symbols and whatnot. So, unfortunately, they're two different ways. And then our email, if you want to email us, give me 1 second because I don't know it yet.
That's why I threw the social media to you, because I couldn't remember which one had the ampersand and which one did not.
Yeah. So our email is historiesandmysteries 515@gmail.com. And there is no ampersand in our email because, again, symbols do not work. So, histories and mysteries spelt out 515@gmail.com. You can send us any recommendations that you have, or you can send us some listener stories. It can be paranormal, true crime, just like some really cool history facts about your family that you want to share, and we'll read them. So, we would love it.
Yes.
And like and follow our pages, and you can personal message us if you want. Let us know how you like it and if you have any recommendations.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, and we hope you come back next week.
Yay! Bye,
Bye.
guys!